Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. Can't see him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweater working for the man, alright. Well, hey. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Crew-led when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take all the way to sleepless sun, alright. Well,
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey race fans, welcome to the Whoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we go over this weekend in racing. We're going to stray from our usual format this week, and we're going to devote an entire hour to IndyCar and the IndyCar season opener in St. Pete. With that in mind, let me introduce you to the panel I have assembled tonight. With me in the studio, race engineer Richard Youden. I've got Joey Barnes from IndyCar.com, Christopher DeHarde from Motorsports Tribune, and joining us for the first time on the program, Mike Joachim from Pit Lane Parlay. Now, Mike, did I pronounce your name right?
It's Joachim, but
Joachim?
It's all the same.
I want to call you Joaquin, but so anyway, now before we jump into IndyCar, let's acknowledge that there was a NASCAR race. Okay, Kevin Harvick won his third in a row. He was followed to the line by Kyle Busch, Chase Elliott, Denny Hamlin, and Martin Truex. The race was in Phoenix. NASCAR will next be at Fontana as Harvick tries to make it 4 in a row. Good season for the Ford cars, but based on this top 5, look like the Toyotas are climbing back up there. So with that being said, let's talk about the IndyCar season opener. This is probably, or realistically, one of the most anticipated season openers in IndyCar in years and years and years. You know, even more so than the reunification in 2008. You know, we've got the new iteration of the car, reskinned. Everyone's excited about it. Less downforce. We've got a huge crop of rookie drivers out there to display their talents. In the race, we saw a familiar winner at St. Pete, Sebastian Bourdais, repeating there, coming back from injuries. We saw a great battle between a rookie driver and an Indy 500 winner that came down right to the end there. Just a lot to talk about. But, Mike, I want to start with you because you're new to the show. One thing that I observed was that we had some pretty impressive rookies in the field there. You know, of course, Robert Wickens, who drove about 107 really great laps out of 110, and Matthias Leist, who did really well in qualifying, had some troubles in the race. Jordan King took a turn at the front, past Wickens on the track. And then we saw some of the veterans struggle. We saw TK make a mistake, Will Power, Dixon had a few uncharacteristic mistakes, and Rossi to a certain extent with the mistake on the last pass there. So I was reading some comments, and they said that the problem is that these drivers have a lot of muscle memory, and they're driving the car as it used to drive, and the rookies who've got no experience in the previous iteration are driving the car as it drives. So, Mike, is there validity to that these guys are just relying on old muscle memory when they get in the action?
Yeah, I saw that same comment. I think it was Graham Rahal who said that Sunday or Monday after the race. It's probably true to a certain extent to, you know, some of the drivers, maybe the less talented veterans that maybe are in the field. But I don't think it makes too much of a difference. You know, we saw Will Power fight his way back up from an early spin. Hinchcliffe was up there the entire time. Dixon recovered from his mistakes. So I don't think it makes a huge difference in the grand scheme of things. But, you know, as you saw, Dixon made an error. You know, Will Power spun early, and some of these guys kind of struggled to find their footing early on. But, you know, after the first couple laps of the race are, you know, kind of, you know, in the books, it seemed like most guys started to, you know, settle in.
Yeah, but again, you know, a great start for some of these rookies. And, you know, Joey, you and I were talking that some of these guys that came out of the Light Series would benefit from that because the car drives a bit similar to the chassis they've worked with there. But let's talk about Robert Wickens for a while, because you made some observations about Robert during Phoenix testing, where he was rather aggressive and kind of chopping in front of other guys, and we kind of speculated he might have a tough go. But here on the road course, he was pretty darn impressive. Joey, what are your thoughts on Robert Wickens and how the rest of his season is going to unfold?
I mean, this is kind of in his wheelhouse, isn't it? Like running a road course, street course like this. I mean, he came from was a World Series Renault back in the day, and then obviously DTM most recently. But let's see what happens when he gets to an oval. The season hasn't quite started. It sounds NASCAR-esque, but I don't really think the season starts until we get to Phoenix, just because we've got this long stretch of 3 to 4 weeks off before we get there. So I think the oval game is something that's going to be tricky for all these rookies, just because the car's a different animal, and the nature of ovals in general are a different animal. So that said, I'll hold off on the whole last pass, how I feel about that whole thing. But I think Wickens, he showed up. He did a hell of a job. I think it's interesting to note that he's one race into this, and he's already showing stronger pace than Hinchcliffe. We'll see what carries over for the remainder of the season. But certainly Schmidt-Peterson, the one concern I had was the engineering and all the other staff that's been brought in from a technical standpoint, and just the lack of continuity they've had. But what do we know? Obviously, it didn't really seem to matter whenever he went out there and snatched pole. Granted, he had some dry spots there at the very last of qualifying, which was fun, but still, you got to show the pace. You got to stay up front. You got to do the job, and he certainly did the job on Sunday, all but the last 2 laps of it. So, hell of a run for him.
Hell of a run for him, yeah. So, and Joey, you and I speculated that Schmidt-Peterson might struggle this year, and they certainly, like you said, what do we know? But Chris, one of the teams that did struggle, other than Will Power, qualifying P2, and then kind of having to claw his way back after the mistake on the opener, mistake or bump or however you want to call it. But Team Penske really not in the mix. You think it's a Penske problem, a Chevrolet problem, or is it just an uncharacteristic one-off with the new car, and they'll be tough to beat the rest of the year?
I think Honda might have had a bit more power underneath them. I mean, they had, the first 7 positions or so? I think they had 8 out of the first 9.
Top 6, yeah. Highest finishing Chevrolet was Newgarden in 7th.
I wouldn't credit this as a big Penske to do. I mean, it's only the first race of the year. I mean, after all, they didn't win St. Pete last year either, and Newgarden won the title. So let's not look too much into it right now. Although, given how bad Penske performed, where Newgarden didn't even make the second round of qualifying, I maybe would look more at the qualifying pace rather than the race pace, because let's face it, St. Petersburg does not necessarily, indicate how the rest of the year is going to go.
No, it certainly doesn't. Ask Sebastian Bourdais that. So Joey says Joseph Newgarden was among the top 5 in most passes made, and we did see, I believe the number was 366 passes made, and if Seth was here, our numerologist, he would tell us who they all were, but we don't have any time for that. But
Rossi had 31.
31 for Rossi, yeah. So now, Richard, you're our race engineer, so you've had a chance to see the new cars and how they perform compared to the old cars. A lot of talk about the lack of downforce on the back and the sliding and the marbles on the track and how that affected the car. So just overall, what are your thoughts and feelings from an engineering standpoint on this new car and what we're in store to see the rest of the season?
A couple of very, very quick points. Firstly, how many passes was that for Rossi? Was it 31?
31, yeah.
That's really 30 and a half, wasn't it? But I think one of the most interesting things coming out of the weekend was actually post-race. I think it was maybe yesterday. Comments by Tim Cindric saying that he doesn't want the race to become too spec. I think and we've talked about this many, many times on this show, and I know I've raised it a number of times. These bigger teams, the likes of the Andretti's, the Penskes, the Ganassis, they put a lot of money into into their program. They don't want to be beaten by the smaller teams. They want to be able to flex their muscles and spend their money because that's why they've got their money. That's why they demand the big sponsorships from the Verizons, the Menards, and guys like that. So obviously there is a certain amount of, it's a new setup, it's a new configuration, it's a new chassis, it's a lot of learning going on. But I mean, these guys have done a lot of testing, and the simulation tools that Honda and Chevy all have are pretty advanced these days. So I'm surprised at how some of these bigger teams did struggle. And again, there's maybe a little bit of this, as was mentioned earlier, the guys coming in, the drivers being, we're driving on how the old car's driven. Well, again, you've had plenty of practice, plenty of testing. These guys are good. They're really good. They should not have that as an excuse anymore. But also at the end of the day, Robert Wickens, he's an extremely talented driver. He's not a rookie in sort of in the NASCAR world, the William Byron's a rookie sort of stuff. This guy's been around. He's raced in a lot of categories. He's been very, very successful, and he's racing a lot of different styles of car. So he's, jumping from car to car is not going to be an issue for a guy like that. And I'm sure that within a race or two, everybody will get back in the stride, and Penske will start to come towards the front, and Ganassi will start to come towards the front, and these guys that you expect to be, in the top six, will start to be there. But there was a little bit of clumsy driving going on out there again. You could almost tell that it's been a long time since these guys have been, on the track sort of next to each other. So it'll be interesting to see how it pans out in the next few races. Absolutely.
So let's talk about the pass for the lead there at the end, or the attempted pass for the lead, and because there's a lot of different speculation out there. A lot of folks are blaming Rossi. Rossi's taking a beating on social media. Rossi's throwing it back at Wickens. Paul Tracy said Wickens left the door open. Why shouldn't Rossi go for it? In my mind, it was looked like Wickens tried to keep the inside, forcing Rossi to pass in the outside. The track was pretty marbly, but Rossi was going to go for it. One way or the other. So I'll start with you, Mike. Really quickly, everybody thoughts on this last pass. Is penalty for Rossi, yes or no? Mistake by Wickens, yes or no? What do you think, Mike?
First off, I don't have an issue with the pass. Going for the win there on the last lap. Going into a part of the track that has a ton of marbles may not have been his best idea. But as Paul Tracy said, Wickens moved over just slightly so he wouldn't get called for blocking, and that opened up just enough of a window that Rossi thought maybe he could squeeze it in there. Was it a great idea? Probably not, but I don't have any issue with him going for the win on the last lap there.
All right, Joey Barnes.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with it either. I think when you look at the angle that Wickens going into one, it was a much sharper angle, and maybe crowded Rossi a little bit with the marbles and with the curbing. I look at this as a situation where, think about where he's lined up for turn two. If Wickens swings that wide enough, he's already set up for turn two with Rossi on the outside, and he's able to hold him off anyway, getting through two. So I really don't think that was a move that needed to be defended so heavily in turn one, because I'm focused more on making sure that I've got the inside coming out of two. So no penalty. No problem with the move.
All right, and Christopher?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the move. The only issue I have is that I was talking to Wickens on pit lane afterwards, and he said, I asked him if he was in Rossi's shoes, would he have done the same thing? He said, I would have settled for P2 because having that in my first IndyCar race is a dream. I don't believe him in that case. I think Wickens, honestly, would have gone for the same move Rossi did, because you're a race car driver. You're paid to win. You're not paid to, just settle like that. So do I wish it could have gone on where they didn't have contact? Absolutely. But I don't fault Rossi for making the move because, let's face it, he's there to win. He's not there to just, lay back.
Yeah, and and if he'd have pulled off the pass and took the win, he'd be a hero. It'd be the move of the year.
Absolutely.
Move of the young year so far. So, and Richard, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah.
Formula One guy not used to passes for the lead.
Oh. I think it was clumsy by Rossi. I think that he put himself in a position where that could happen. From Wicken's standpoint, a little bit naive maybe to expect that somebody of Rossi's experience and isn't going to try and make that move. But I said it was a little bit clumsy when Rossi sort of lost the back end there. It's like, I don't think there's a penalty, but I think there's, it probably wouldn't hurt ahead of the next race from everybody, the drivers to all sit down and say, look, come on, guys, let's just think about what we're doing here and understand what's at stake, because it really did sort of spoil the end of what was a fantastic race. And nothing against Sebastian Bourdais, he's won the race. He's done what he needed to do. He kept his nose clean. He probably was sitting there on that last restart thinking, hey, I want to back off a little bit here because these guys quite easily could trip over themselves. So, not taking anything away from him winning the race. But, it was almost clumsy. It was almost a little bit of a letdown to the end of what was a fantastic race and fantastic weekend.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, Bourdais was ready to just go ahead and finish up. But, just keeping his eye where it's at. Graham Rahal made the comment, too. He says, it's just way too marbly to try to make a move. I'm going to settle for P4 and get some points. Ends up on the podium. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's all about being in the right place at the right time. And let's talk about Sebastian Bourdais for a moment, because 1 year ago, he came out of the box with the win at St. Pete. Great runs in the next couple races. And we were talking about his potential to bring a championship to Dale Coyne Racing for the first time in that team's existence. Getting off to another good start. Mind you, he didn't have a car fast enough to contend for the lead, but a combination of strategy, great pit work, and a little bit of luck put him in that position where he was the victor at the end of the day. But, Joey, do you think that there's a possibility, and I know it's really early, that, with this new equalizing effect with the new car, that we could see Bourdais seriously challenge the Penske's, Ganassis, and Andretti's of the world for a championship?
Absolutely. We've been talking about how, even though it's a new car, talent transcends, and Bourdais has some of the best talent out there. So, I look at this from an aesthetics point of view. This kind of looks like the old Champ car in some respects, which he obviously had a lot of success in, but obviously it races a little differently. But as we can see, he clearly has the pace, and if you're able to put the pace together at a place like St. Pete, which does lack grip, which you do slide around a lot, it's a tough street course. I'd look for him to back this up at Long Beach, at Barber, and things like that. I think the kicker here is what are they going to be able to do on ovals to just manage everything? Because I think that at Indy last year, and Chris, you were with me during qualifying about this, is just his pace at Indy. I think had the incident not happened in qualifying, he hands down would have been a contender on Sunday. And because that's the best I've ever seen him primed and ready to attack the Indy 500. And we all know that Bourdais is not necessarily known as an oval master beyond a couple of interesting runs at Milwaukee. But, I think that you add that combination along with Vassar coming on board and Sullivan, I think this is a good situation for Bourdais, and I think they're going to be a tough team to handle for the entire season. As is Rahal as well. Finishing P2, we saw some pace out of them in Phoenix during the test, even though they got a late jump on everything, just like Bourdais' team did. Clearly, manufacturer testing was overrated because all the complaining that we had heard about. When I'm looking at the scoreboard right here, you got to go down to P4 James Hinchcliffe to see somebody that was involved in manufacturer testing that actually did anything. And behind him was Scott Dixon in 6th, and you got to go Newgarden. But, for the most part, there's a pretty good mix of people that did and did not do manufacturer testing that ended up in the top 10.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'm glad that you brought up Rahal. And Chris, because I was going to say that of the teams that could contend with the Penske, Ganassi, and possibly Andretti, I think Rahal's right up there. Now, Chris, go ahead with your thought. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, when you look at the guys that are at the top step up here, the top of the mark, Dale Coyne, they still don't have everything figured out, maybe 100% like how Penske and Ganassi normally you would expect them to. They do have a smaller engineering department. They do have a smaller, team, smaller payroll overall, but they're doing the most of the least. They also have great people, though. Craig Hampson is an amazing engineer. Robin Miller said that if he was starting an IndyCar team, Craig would be the first person he would hire. In my opinion, you're going to have, if it doesn't matter how big you are, what matters is what you do with what you have. And quite frankly, Coyne has shown that if you put the right people in the right places, you don't necessarily need the best people. You just need the right people, and they've shown that. Will this form continue for the rest of the year, though? Is still too early to see.
Yes, absolutely. Now, speaking of smaller teams and rookie drivers, I was pretty impressed with Jordan King in qualifying, and his race day wasn't quite as good there. But King he's pretty much he's rather unknown in the United States, but he comes from a very wealthy British family. His dad was a CEO of major grocery store company in all of Great Britain. His folks have certainly helped him with his racing career. He's certainly bringing money to the team there. But the guy's got a pretty good pedigree. He was a Formula One test driver. But so Chris and or Mike, you guys were out to try. You guys get a chance to talk with young Jordan King at all, and his thoughts on his first IndyCar race?
I didn't. I don't know if Chris, you got to talk to him.
I did not.
Okay, well, that went nowhere. But
just like Matthias Leist's race.
Oh,
yep. Poor.
Well, to be fair to Leist, he did have he did lead the first practice session. He did qualify. I think he qualified third or fourth.
Third. Yes.
Third, and I think he had a gearbox failure that just started a snowball, hit the rest of his bad luck into having an incident between turns 3 and 4. But to Leist's credit, he left St. Petersburg last year after the Indy Lights weekend last in points, just like he is this year. He fought back to finish 4th in points, so let's not count him out just yet.
No, I was pretty impressed with him through qualifying and whatnot. Go ahead, Mike.
I think he had a good weekend overall. Obviously, some unlucky parts there at the end, and I think he had a part failure that caused him to go into the wall. And Jordan King kept surprising me throughout the qualifying rounds, coming out of nowhere, leading the first round and being in the top 3 in the final 12 to get into the fast 6. And he just always quietly seemed to go about his business the entire weekend, which is probably why neither of us got to talk to him, because he just kind of kept to himself. But very impressive debut for him overall.
Yeah, and I always, whenever it comes down to the Ed Carpenter situation with the splitting the one car, between the ovals and the road courses, I know this benefits Ed, so Ed can still drive, and it was great when it was Mike Conway, because Conway wanted nothing to do with ovals, okay, but like in this situation, or this situation with Spencer Pigot, I really think that you're number one, you're limiting him. There's no chance for a championship. Not that, Jordan King may be a championship contender, but, the fact that, 6 races, he's going to get 0 points because he's not starting. But you're also taking him out of, Rookie of the Year consideration, unless he has some stellar results. So I just almost think it's time for Ed to either just enter an extra car for himself or to step aside and really develop the driver. I think that Spencer Pigot's going to show us so much more this year with a full schedule rather than a partial. Joey, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that you look at a situation like that, I feel like if Ed had the money, that would be a no-brainer. I feel like you run into a situation with teams like Ed Carpenter Racing where there are a little bit of that sponsors tied to him being in that car versus having somebody else in there full time. So, obviously, he's talked about this in the past. The perfect scenario would be to run 2 full-time cars and him in a part-time entry, but the resources and the budget just isn't there to warrant that. I remember after after open test in Phoenix a month ago, they actually stayed the extra day after to run Jordan King on the Phoenix Oval on Sunday. So, there is a little bit of trying to get him up to speed, and I think they are exploring options to see what they can do to run him on the Oval. But I got to be honest, at what point do you really care about, this sounds harsh because a lot of us would care about if we got Rookie of the Year or not, but, look at Spencer Pigot versus Gabby Chavez. Gabby Chavez went out there, won Rookie of the Year, pretty much ended up part-time ride the very next year, whereas Spencer Pigot had to go through 2 years of part-time, and now he essentially has his oval baptism this year by running a full schedule after 2 years in a part-time seat. I would probably rather favor the Piggott seat being in a program like this versus what Gabby's had to go through, because, I mean, that's gut-wrenching to go through a full year and then have to go back to partials before you bounce back, and it's tough to get back. So, but yeah, as far as Ed goes, I think that time's coming. I just think that it's a matter of putting all the pieces in the right place. I think that he's going to be somebody that, as we get further into the years, he's going to be somebody that you notice kind of maybe building up a team of 2 and 3 cars with maybe that partial seat. I like how he grooms drivers. How he groomed Spencer was brilliant, and I think it's going to pay dividends this year.
Right, and he's also, did really well with Joseph Newgarden the year they were together with Sarah Fisher. So
yeah,
that's so. And so let's talk about some of the new teams. We've got Harding, we've got Carlin, we've got Junkos all in there. Who wants to jump in and take a stab at talking about one of these teams here?
I'll go in about Carlin. I actually talked to Trevor after the race was over, and he said, well, on the one hand, we did a good job. We've got 2 cars at the end of the race. But on the other hand, we didn't do a good job because we finished 19th and 20th. And I mean, that's not what we're here to do. We're here to win, and we're here. Well, let me rephrase. We're here to actually go for the top 10, to be closer to the top 10. That was his expectations. I like the attitude. I like how he's very competitive. I think Chilton said after Kimball said after the race, I think that they doubled or tripled the knowledge that they had of the IndyCar after the weekend was over. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Carlin bounced back from this. It was also their first street course in an IndyCar, although, well, it's kind of a given because it was their first IndyCar race, but they're going to be back.
Okay. Mike, your thoughts on either Harding or Junkos, or more thoughts on Carlin?
I'll take Harding. I thought Gabby Chavez had a quiet but not a bad weekend. Not as great as their start last year, obviously on the ovals, but they brought it home in one piece, and Chavez seemed happy but eager to continue to similar to Carlin improve on results. So I thought they had a solid but unspectacular first weekend. Definitely not a bad weekend.
All right, and Joey, your thoughts on Junkos maybe, or maybe even Michael Shank? Michael Shank was down there with Jack Harvey.
Tough weekend. I don't really know anything positive I can kind of throw out there. I mean, Jack was having a solid run up until minding his own until the incident. But Rene Bender kind of had a weekend to forget between practices and qualifying. He went off several times. If I was going to talk about a couple of drivers that surprised me and impressed me, Ed Jones coming from 17th on the grid to 8th. I mean, that was pretty impressive given the fact it was his debut with Ganassi Racing, the start of his sophomore year. And then, I know not necessarily the greatest thing with Mateus Lice, but he's one of those guys that I'm looking at that when he finally puts this whole thing together and is able to run a complete race, I mean, that kid has got absolute raw talent and absolute raw speed. And A.J. Foyt may have found their diamond in the rough with him. So I think it's one of those situations that once they finally polish that up and he's able to complete everything, he's going to be somebody to watch moving forward. And I wouldn't be surprised if towards the last half of the year he ends up having some really good runs.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. So, Mike, anybody else out there that just kind of caught your eye? Marco Andretti maybe, is his resurgence year going to be this time, or anybody else out there?
Yeah, I'll take Marco as the local Pennsylvania representative on the show here. I thought he had a pretty good weekend, and he was running pretty high, third overall for a while there before he, slipped back and finished 10th. But he was competitive for the most part throughout the weekend, and I think he just missed moving on to the Fast 12 by a couple thousandths of a second, if I'm not mistaken there. I don't have the numbers in front of me. So I was impressed. I think Andretti overall had a much better opening weekend than they have in a number of years.
Yeah, and it would have been even better had Rossi made that stick at the end. So, but let's talk about Rossi as a championship contender. I mean, because I really, we've been talking about this for like 2 years, watching him come up. That I think this may be the year that he may have a Simon Pagenaud or a Will Power type year. I can really see that happening. You guys agree? Disagree?
Yeah. I think when you see what he was able to put together, not just from a single lap pace, but from a collective pace. I mean, the pace that he put down in that race was unreal. I mean, he was not in a situation to necessarily be the leader. He was always having to chase somebody, and he just extracted so much pace out of that car at a place as slick as St. Pete that, I was really impressed. I think that he's never, as he alluded to, he's never started the season this strong, but regardless of a new car or anything else, we see that he's not making any excuses. And I think a lot of that comes down to him and Millis, his engineer, just being together for the start of a year. They were together last year to start off, and they really started to hit their stride around the month of May. And I think this is a continuation of that. And he's going to be tough to beat just about everywhere, especially on elevated road courses like Barber and places like that, Mid-Ohio. So he's going to be tough.
Yeah, I was about to throw out Watkins Glen, then I remembered we're not racing there. Oh my! So, Christopher, what other great thoughts you have coming out of St. Pete before we kind of move on and start talking about Mazda Road to Indy and Indianapolis 500 entries and whatnot? So, but I know you spent the whole weekend at the track, so I want to get some of your thoughts and things that you saw or heard.
Well, I love the fact that Schmidt-Peterson. Just another comment about Schmidt-Peterson, with how much they overhauled their program over the year, over the winter time, they truly had a fantastic show, and it showed that there was money all well spent. I want to say a good shout out here to the fact that Kanan, even though he had the situation on the first lap, he fought back to finish 11th, so at least he got that result in, and hey, at least we got a situation where we didn't have too many heavy incidents, for IndyCar. I mean, yeah, we had the situation with Harvey, we had the situation with Wickens and all, and the one with Lace, but we didn't have anything that was like crazy bad. So at least we can say, hang our hat on that.
Yeah, we got plenty to talk about, and not a lot of it's negative. Yeah, go ahead, Joey.
Well, I was just going to say that this weekend could be it was everything that you could have hoped for. I can't stop gushing about how the weekend was. I just, from what we saw from a racing standpoint, and I know that Richard talked about these cars, you could tell that these drivers hadn't raced side by side in a while, and it looked a little clunky. I think a product of that was the fact that we finally got to see them run these things in anger for competition, for points that mattered, and that mixed in with a tough track, mixed in with a car that has been a relative unknown until you got to unload in St. Pete. I love the fact that these things are a handful to drive. I mean, that's why we saw such a good show. And, we got Rossi passing 31 cars. Marco passed 25 cars. Somebody else passed 25 cars. I think Dixon. And, mix into that, the Penske we saw struggle a little bit. And they have all-world drivers over there that are obviously going to be coming back. I mean, we got a very nice storyline setting up for the rest of the year, and I can't stop just getting giddy about what we saw. I mean, we saw, a rising star in Robert Wickens almost take the win, along with a guy who's really started to come into his own and be a championship threat in Rossi. And those two collide, and the feel-good story of the weekend with Bourdais getting the win. You couldn't have asked for anything better collectively to close that, and none of that would have been possible if not for the attaboy from the AMR, Home Ultra, whatever they're going by, safety team, in just getting Chilton off the track, or getting started, I should say, quicker, and them electing to have kind of just a one race under caution. He's going to start at the tail anyway. Let's fire these things up and go for just a quick hit shootout, because whenever he went off and stalled out there at the very end, I thought we were going to end under caution from that, and instead we got kind of a nice little edgy finish, which is everything this sport thrives on. So happy to see that. Happy it wasn't something similar to NASCAR where a piece of metal lays on the track, and it takes 15 minutes to get everybody started. So, yeah, I'm just overall just excited about the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did get that cleaned up real quick, and I was surprised. Yeah, one lap of yellow went back to green. You know, there's some speculation that I guess the lights didn't go off on the pace car, and Wiggins didn't know we were going for a start. I don't know if I believe any of that, but so Mike,
the lights did not go out on the pace car actually.
Right. Yeah, so they weren't sure if they were going to green, although the radio told them they were going green. So I don't know.
They were informed before it turned 10 they were going to head to green.
Yeah, it was kind of like an impulse last-second decision. It sounded like on watching the television broadcast anyway, because they felt like they'd go one more to go, and then suddenly now going green. Which, I mean, give credit to race control for going ahead and getting that, right back underway. Too bad we did end under caution anyway. So, but Mike, before we start moving on to talk about the Mazda Road Indy and the races that were in St. Pete there. Let me get some of your thoughts out of being in the IndyCar paddock and pit lane all weekend long.
Yeah, it was amazing how crowded it was even Saturday for the MRTI races and qualifying. It was very difficult to move around and get from place to place. Took longer than I really expected it to. And, looking at the stands in the MRTI races, there was a lot of people watching the up and coming racers, which was great to see. And I saw a cool stat, which I'm sure you guys saw online, that this was the first race since Houston in 2014 that neither Penske nor Ganassi led a single lap of the race. So maybe we're getting to a little bit more of a parity era here in IndyCar, which is definitely very exciting.
Definitely exciting, yeah. And the other good news, like you said, attendance was up this year. The TV ratings were up. They were up a tenth, right, from a 0.9 to a 1.0. That's 11%. So good news there. A lot of talk about the television package for next year. They're getting close to signing a deal, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. But first off, let's go over the Mazda Road to Indy. And Chris, I'll start with you because I know you cover this and follow it closely. But our winners were in Indy Lights, Patricio Award, Patty Award, the Irish guy from Mexico, won. Sante Urita took the other one. Pro Mazda, Rinus VK took both races. And in USF 2000, Kyle Kirkwood and Alex Barron were the winners, and that's not the same Alex Barron from CART many years ago. But Chris, let's talk about some of the highlights from the Mazda Road to Indy.
So Rinus VK winning both Pro Mazda races. He's the first driver to win both Pro Mazda races at St. Petersburg since some guy named Spencer Piggott back in 2014. In that year, he won the championship. Although a lot of the guys that do win both races at St. Petersburg tend not to win the championship. So moving up to Indy Lights, Santi Urrutia winning race 2, that was humongous for him because he did not have a good weekend at St. Petersburg last year with, one race he had a retirement, the second race he got a podium. But this weekend having a second and a first was fantastic for him in his third season in Indy Lights. Pato Award unfortunately went off in the second race and dropped a few positions, so not necessarily ideal for him. But on the bright side, he's only down by 8 points to Santi in the championship. The guy who I really feel bad for this weekend in Indy Lights is Aaron Telitz, though, and the Bilardi Auto Racing guys with all the hardship they had to deal with.
Yeah, elaborate on that a little bit for our listeners who haven't heard the whole story.
Oh yeah, no problem. So Aaron qualified on the pole for race 1, and he was qualifying for race 2 of the weekend, which the second qualifying took place for the first race. Had a crash, was uninjured, but the tub was damaged enough where it could not be used in that weekend's races. So he had to sit out the first race. They had to they talked to a couple of different teams. Carlin had 4 Indy Lights cars at their shop in Delray Beach, Florida, which is over 200 miles away. So John Brunner, team manager of Bilardi Auto Racing, got into a trailer that Arms Up Motorsports had lent them and drove over to Delray Beach, Florida, met this guy named Adam over there that was a Carlin crew member, got the car. In 15 minutes, he was out of the door and on his way back to St. Petersburg. And then they got the car prepped overnight. The car arrived at midnight. The crew guys slept in shifts, and then Aaron did an installation lap early in the morning on Sunday morning before any of the two-seater or event car rides took place. He started third, and then at the second corner, he was out of the race.
It's a bummer. It's all that work for that, yeah. So, but I mean, Tielitz is a guy I look at, and Award as well. I think these two guys in particular are future stars in IndyCar, provided that they can get, a deal put together, because there's a lot of talent doesn't make it to the top for the fact they can't get a deal put together or can't get a sponsor. But those are two guys that I've watched the last couple of years that are both quite impressive.
They have had a big rivalry. They were teammates in Pro Mazda in 2016. In fact, Award actually won 5 of the first 6 races that year in Pro Mazda, but unfortunately, the end of his season that year did not come together well. So he's been on the warpath trying to win a championship that he can move up to IndyCars and be the next big Mexican superstar in IndyCar racing. And
there's speculation that we need a Mexican superstar in IndyCar racing to get that race in Mexico City they keep threatening to do, So, but it represents a large market. I remember we had guys in the past, Michel Jourdain, Adrian Fernandez. They had tremendous fan bases back in the kart era. So that was a good thing to have a star from south of the border for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, now, Mike, you watch all the MRTI races too. What are your thoughts on some of these young up and comers? Anybody, any new faces in there really impress you?
Like Chris said, I was pretty impressed with Pato Award all weekend without, one minor, slip up there. He easily wins both races. The second race, he was up by, it has to be 5 or 6 seconds before he made the error. And then down in Pro Mazda, he did not win either of the races that came away second points in Parker Thompson. Is definitely one of the most fiery competitors I have ever met, seeing him how upset he was just to finish in second place after race 1, and I think he finished in 4th in race 2, if I'm not mistaken. But looked strong all weekend, and seeing that competitive drive, lends to me thinking that he's going to have a strong year and move up the paddock next year.
Absolutely. Now, Joey, I mean, you pay attention to this quite as well. So, what are some of your thoughts there, other than the fact that I butchered everybody's name?
Well, first off, I mean, obviously, Pato, ridiculous speed for the weekend. He has like this interesting mindset for this year that's different. I was talking to him at Homestead a couple weeks ago. He's so focused on just being consistent, and he even said it, if I can't finish first, I need to make sure I finish second. If I can't finish second, I need to do my best to finish third. There's only 9 or 10 guys in this field, but the talent is so stacked that you have to do your best to always stay in the top 5. And, props to him, because the last couple of years, Santi was just gung-ho, like, I must win, and didn't really think about too much else, and that kind of mindset would get him into trouble, and that's why he's a 2-time runner-up finisher in the championship Indy Lights. So I think that this is going to springboard him to really thrive moving forward and go into places like Barber next month, where he really thrives. But aside from that, I've also got to kind of give a shout out there to Shelby Blackstock. He's with Pelfrey. It was a one race weekend deal. And it was a very last minute, I think that was done 5 or 6 days before the race. So he was really scrambling, because it was believed that he was going to be in the 3rd entry for Bilardi to start the year, but things shook out a little differently. And to go out there and finish runner-up in race 2, obviously I know that race 2 was a little chaotic, because we saw, Franzoni knock out Tielitz there at the opening sequence. We saw, Colton Herta struggle and end up in the wall in the second race as well. But, regardless, to finish first, you must first finish, and he may have not finished first, but he got a good runner-up result in a weekend that he absolutely needed it moving forward. Beyond that, the USF 2000 gaggle of drivers, there's some 22 cars, I think, that were in the field, and it was an interesting difference. It wasn't just a Cape Motorsports domination. Obviously, Kirkwood went out there and took care of business in race 1, but beyond that, I'm looking at at other guys that showed up. I'm looking at D-Force Racing and Newman Walks, and obviously Alex Barron, who you alluded to, giving Swan RJB their first win. And it's interesting because his story, that Alex Barron, it's an interesting story because he's a guy who has an Indy Lights win with Bilardi back in 2014. He's also got 2 other Indy Lights finishes or wins, I should say, maybe 3 wins, lost count, back in 2013. So it's interesting to see that he's one of those guys that kind of ebbs and flows and goes back and forth, but he's still able to obviously show pace regardless of a different USF 2000 car than what he had driven several years ago. So it's going to be a wild year. Obviously, Renus VK showed strong pace for the weekend. I got to also back up what Mike said about Parker Thompson. He showed everything that you wanted to see out of a driver in race 1. And that's his first race, like Renus's. That was his first race up from USF to Pro Mazda. So these USF guys bumped up to Pro Mazda this year have obviously shown strong pace, and it's going to be a fun year.
Oh, it is going to be a fun year. As I look at this whole thing, I think it's great that we've got such strong fields in the USF 2000 and the Pro Mazda because it's a very cost-effective series there. But it just seems like that jump to Indy Lights, is cost prohibitive. We keep having very, very small Indy Lights fields in there, and I'm just wondering if there's anything that can be done to help some of these guys jump up from Pro Mazda into Indy Lights when there's just so few folks running that. So the obvious answer would be if more of your bigger IndyCar teams would do like Andretti and run a lights team. It'd be neat to see a development team from Penske, from Ganassi, from Ed Carpenter. So you guys have any thoughts on that, or is it just not going to happen? Penske spends enough on his IndyCar program.
Go ahead, Mike.
The one thing I'll say, make it quick, is Carlin had 3 or 4 Indy Lights cars last year, and because of their transition to IndyCar, doesn't have any right now. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the count jump up by a couple, just by the fact that I'm sure by this time next year, Carlin will have a couple guys knocking at the door for Indy Lights and with budget.
Yeah, to kind of back that up, Carlin, talking to him at Phoenix at the Open Test, alluding to that Indy Lights program, he said he had a couple of takers for a part-time campaign, but nothing for a full-time campaign, and that's why he promoted about 80% of his Lights team up to IndyCar. I think that in a weird way, one of their cars did run on Sunday. It just ran for about 500 feet. But I think that Carlin, certainly that's being missed this year. Let's talk about Schmidt, because it was just a couple of years ago that Schmidt was running a couple of cars out there with Santi making his rookie year with them. So,
absolutely, yeah.
So I think that once things pan out with this new car and IndyCar with the new body kit, and the fact that we see so much of this Dallara IL-15 from Indy Lights translate chassis-wise to what they're able to drive from field in the IndyCar series, I think we're going to see a little bit more of a focus put on Indy Lights, which is everything you could hope for, like you talked about, with some of these guys going from the IndyCar series and going Indy Lights racing. And I think that's why you see certain guys like Piggott able to feel really good in the car, and guys like Veach able to feel good in this car. And I think it's just a matter of time before we see a little bit of that start to blur over. So, but it's going to take some time.
All right, so we've got a couple of weeks off. We've got the longest off season, then we got a break right after race 1, but we're headed to Phoenix next. Now, Phoenix, the first few years since Phoenix has joined the schedule, has not produced a very good race. And I think that its proximity to the NASCAR date at the same track, which is now called, what do they call it now? ICS?
ISM.
ISM. I'll just call it Phoenix. That's what I'm used to. Proximity to the NASCAR date kind of hurts them crowd-wise. So I'm really hoping that the new car races well on the short oval. The testing seems to indicate that it will. I don't know if it's going to be anything like the Indianapolis 500 in 2013, but it should be much better than the parade we've seen at Phoenix the last few years. What say you, Joey Barnes, who watched the test in Phoenix?
I think it's going to be a decent race. Everything that I saw from that shows me that. That said, obviously you're always skeptical because of history, but looking at the fact that, and listening to the fact that these guys are having to actually let off going into turn one, you're actually seeing them have a handful coming off of 4. And we saw some of those, like you talked about earlier, with what I noticed with Robert Wickens kind of chopping people off of 2 and just getting a few of the cars bunched up there. Whenever you come off of 2 and a bunch of guys got to run on you and you cut them off, and you got 4 or 5 guys eager to make the pass. So, these cars have a different look to them at Phoenix than what we saw last year. I mean, last year with the manufacturer body kit, you could pretty much stand on it almost all the way around and pull incredibly heavy Gs. And in here, I'm hearing cars let off. I'm seeing a handful off of 4 and seeing guys get a little bit of loose. So I think that we're in for a solid race. Let's be honest. Flat tracks don't always produce the most passing. What they're supposed to do is present an opportunity there to where guys are going to have to make moves that they're not entirely comfortable making. So, we saw that with Milwaukee a handful of years ago, and I think we're going to end up seeing something similar to that come Phoenix in April.
And I can't wait. I mean, it's disappointing that we have to wait a few weeks for another race. But so let's talk about the television package, okay? ABC once again taking a beating on social media about the television coverage or lack of television coverage. I mean, they missed a couple restarts when they were at commercial. We had no camera angle on the Will Power incident. We didn't have a really great camera angle on the Wickens incident. And folks are almost unanimous in their dislike for Mr. Cheever and Mr. Goodyear. With that being said, ABC is evidently one of the finalists one of the 2 finalists to take over the television contract. So with that being said, now I know, Chris, you're a big proponent of cord cutting and seeing what we need to see on streaming. So what do you feel like IndyCar really needs to look at this television package, and where do you see it actually landing?
I think there needs to be a good balance. I think there needs to be a good balance between online streaming and network TV. You like it or not, even though cord cutting is gaining strength, there still are a lot of people that have over-the-air TV, have cable, satellite, all that good stuff. There do needs to be a lot. Easy for me to say. There should be every single race on broadcast TV, but there should be additional features, maybe on streaming platforms like Netflix or Amazon Prime or on Hulu. Or on a special IndyCar network you would pay like a certain amount per month for, where you would get extra onboard cameras, extra video feeds, extra audio feeds, things like that. And I think that might be a good thing for the series to do.
And that's the exact sort of thing Formula One is going to try this year, correct?
From what I heard, yes.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out, But continue.
The momentum against cable and satellite and everything else like that has been growing over the last few years. Although it's hard to tell what's going to be the next replacements. I mean, YouTube TV has gotten bigger. Sling TV is still there. PlayStation View. There's a lot of different services out there that are capable of hosting IndyCar content, but it's the critical component here is, are you going to have it just be on one, or are you going to try to negotiate where you can have it on multiple platforms?
And I think that's where you need to be. I mean, if you look at Sling, Sling has the ability to show you the network television. Maybe not your local affiliate, but they've got some of the network programming on there. So now, Mike, you have thoughts on the TV package or what we might see? I guess we can assume that NBC is the other contender, the other of the 2 finalists, and ABC has, I guess, said they put as many as 10 races on ABC, which would be 10 races for fans to bitch about, but so
yeah, I still think it's going to end up with NBC maybe with a streaming option similar to Formula One. On top of that, I feel like they're kind of IndyCar might be keeping ABC just in the running to make sure they're getting the best deal possible, and think I had read that somebody at NBC said at least 10 to 11 races would be on NBC, with the rest being on, NBCSN. And then if you have some sort of streaming option, I think, for all of the crap we give Formula One for various things, their over-the-top streaming package where you pretty much get everything for $8 or $9 or $10 a month, is kind of a good add-on. And if that averages out to about $100 a year, I have no problem paying that to, be able to watch a race or a practice if I'm not able to be near my TV. So I'm all for some sort of combination of the two.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you had a paid service, that would appeal to the fans who, like you and me, want all the racing coverage or not. But it's not gonna attract anybody new who's flipping channels and happens to catch IndyCar qualifying on network TV and says, "Oh, what's this?" You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think NBC will need to do some extra marketing, but I think they'll be in a better position to do that with the good racing this year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the product is definitely great, right, Joey?
I mean, I'm obviously going to say yes.
Yeah. In IndyCar, say your check's in the mail, Joey. But I know that's honest, is from the heart, because I agree with you, and I know Mike and Chris, you do too. That I think this year is going to be pretty incredible. So, and as with every year in IndyCar, we look forward to the Indianapolis 500. And we've got a field where we may have actual bumping this year. And we had the discussion last week on the show about, to bump or not to bump. Should you just, if you got 35 cars, just go ahead and let them all race? And of all people that you wouldn't expect to agree with that, I was reading Robin Miller's mailbag today. And Robin actually said there's no drama in bumping one or two cars out. We should let all 35 races. There's 35. And that's coming from Mr. Tradition Old-Timer right there. What do you think?
Yeah, I disagree. Yeah, we need bumping. Sorry. Well, we've been craving this for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And the one time that NASCAR doesn't have it is our one chance in IndyCar to see this really take hold and to give an advantage to qualifying. You have a chance to do something that NASCAR hadn't had. So any chance you have to beat your competitor, you've got to take advantage of. And I think that this is a scenario that if there's one thing that IndyCar does win at, it's the month of May. And you've got to maximize it for everything it's worth, and Bump Day is certainly one of the most drama-filled things I can remember as a kid. And it's been rough the last couple of years that I haven't been able to see it. It doesn't take away from the fact that I have enjoyed the show, because the racing product is still second to none. But Bump Day's always been fun, and I'm an advocate because it adds drama to it. And anytime you got drama, you've got people invested. So I think we need it.
Absolutely. Now, Christopher, I'll give you one shot at this before we kind of go around the table for final thoughts.
I rewatched part of 2011's Bump Day recently, and it was pretty amazing, the kind of drama that you have when Marco Andretti gets bumped out by Alex Lloyd, who, if Marco makes his run, he bumps out Hunter Ray. If he doesn't, Hunter Ray gets in. And that kind of drama we've been craving, and now we finally have it. And I'm thrilled that we finally have this going again. Let's just hope that in the coming years we can get to 40, cars or more going for 33 spots.
Yeah, and then Hunter Ray ended up buying his way in anyway, if you recall.
Yep.
Which is cause for more drama and more stuff to talk about. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to the 500 in a big way. The last 6 or 8 have been just fantastic races, and looking forward to another one with a very, very different feel with this new car and with a full field of just all solid contenders. So, but we've just got a couple minutes left in the show. Mike, I want to thank you for coming on. Let us know where we can hear your podcast, and just give your final thought for the evening.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Final thoughts, I think a great first race, and is going to lead to many more great races this year, which is only going to help marketing and really getting the sport back to where it's to where it's been, which will help TV numbers and everything else increase. I'll leave it at that, and you can find Pit Lane Parlay on iTunes and Google Play and CastBox and pretty much everywhere. Also on Wildfire Radio, which is wildfireradio.com. I'll put out the links on my Twitter page at Pit Lane Parlay, Parley. And again, Frank, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mike. Christopher, your final thought for the evening?
It was a heck of a weekend. No complaints on how it went. I just wish we could have, except for winning a green flag finish at the end there. Glad everybody got out of there safely, and rest in peace, Stephen Hawking.
All right, Joey, you got one last thought?
Yeah, I think I'm intrigued to see what Robert Wickens is made of in the bounce back. We saw what he was able to do when he had no pressure on him to perform, but now there's going to be expectations that he's going to start to be a consistent qualifier in the Firestone Fast Six. There's going to be expectations for podiums and maybe even wins, even though he's a rookie. He's not a natural rookie in the sense that Mateus Sester or other guys are. So interested to see the bounce back, especially since the bounce back next comes at an oval. So that's probably my final thought. I think we're in for a hell of a year.
Formula One coming up in a couple weeks to start their season. NASCAR's in California. Gray wanted me to let you know he's picking Blaney for the race. Richard's picking Chase Elliott. I'll just go with Harvick goes 4 in a row. You guys want to take a NASCAR pick or not? You don't have to. It's our IndyCar show.
Nah.
I'll say Kyle Busch for the win. I'll pick Chase Elliott to finish second again.
All right, but you don't get to pick who finished second, though. So, Mike, you want to take a pick for the NASCAR race just for the pool?
Yeah, sure. I'll go with Ryan Blaney.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so, guys, thanks for coming on. I want to thank Whoobazoo Radio Network. This is Drafting the Circuits. I want to thank the listeners. Thank iHeartRadio. Thank you, Christopher, Joey, Mike, and all the listeners. Guys, have a great evening. Good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Whoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.